Oh, such a clutch off-season pickup, Dave.
I was worried we'd bring back the same team.
I meant those blackout motorized shades.
Blinds.com made it crazy affordable to replace our old blinds.
Hard to install?
No, it's easy. I installed these and then got some for my mom. She talked to a design consultant for free and scheduled a professional measure and install.
Hall of Fame son.
They're the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings in the world.
Blinds.com is the GOAT.
Shop up to 40% off site-wide, plus an extra 10% off every order and a free professional measure happening right now at Blinds.com.
Hello everyone and welcome to How Are the Podcast. It's Gav and you join us today for a very special episode of the show. Today we were going to do a bit of a news pod, see what's going on in the world of Sunderland, but probably the biggest bit of news of the transfer window, certainly from a Sunderland perspective, did drop earlier in the day when it was confirmed that Dan Neil has departed the club on loan to join Ipswich. But of course his contract runs out in the summer and that means it's probably the last time we will have seen him representing Sunderland. So we thought it was probably important today to pay tribute to a player who's been really important to the club during this little period where we've rebuilt ourselves. And I think we're just going to chat a little bit about Dan Neil today. So first up joining me, and he's only here for a short while today, but we've got Andrew Smithson with us. Hello, mate.
Hello, mate. Yes, I can only be with you for a short while, but I thought Dan Neil's been a good player for us, so I'll throw in my 2 pence on him.
Definitely. And also with us is Chris
All right,
Wynn.
mate.
Hello,
Yeah,
mate.
it's a strange day, isn't it? Captain that goes promoted and left the club, and it's as we'll get into it, I'm sure all these strange feelings will come out because I'm not sure there's been many transfers like this or a player leaving like this in these circumstances.
Yeah, that's right, isn't it, Andrew? It's been a bit somber today, just reading the reaction and seeing all of the various comments about Dan Neil from his contemporaries, from his teammates, and people who've worked with him and stuff. But I think first and foremost, as fans, let's comment on it from a fan perspective. And I kind of said it in my intro there, right? I think Dan Neil has been integral to this rebuild at Sunderland, and I'm certainly very, very grateful for everything he's done.
Same here. He's done a lot for us, being a really good player for us, being a really good character. I think he epitomises the early years of the current regime and the first phase of the model, in that he was like a youth player from the area who was given a chance and genuinely loved pulling on a Sunderland shirt. I mean, he would do any job you asked of him. He started as like a creative midfielder, and yet he's sat in deeper positions. I think his full debut, he was a fullback, if I remember rightly. I'm sure he played left back for a couple of weeks because we were in a bit of a tight situation. So yeah, exactly like you, Gav, a lot of really good memories about him. And I wish him so much luck in the future. I hope he does really well.
Yeah, it is, like I said, Chris, a little bit somber, isn't it? Because obviously he's been there right through that rebuild where we've kind of risen from the third tier, and obviously Dan Neil has been one of the big beneficiaries of that, really. You know, he probably, like a lot of lads now in the current system, probably wouldn't have got a chance if we'd been in the Premier League. Like, that's the sort of thing that happens when you drop down the divisions. Even some of your most talented academy players don't get opportunities. But and I wrote a piece for the website which I think kind of sums this up for me. But he came through at a time when other players, other talented lads his age, they jumped ship, they went elsewhere, they went to clubs higher up the pyramid. And Dan Neil stuck around, he kept faith with the football club and he got his opportunities. And the fact we're sitting here now talking about a lad who captained Sunderland to a Wembley win, only Rach Carter has done that. Only one other Sunderland fan has ever taken Sunderland to Wembley as a captain, and that was Rach Carter. So he's in special company there. But you've got to say, even though he's such a young man and he probably at stages thought, I'll never leave this club, this is my club, I'll be here forever, achieved so much in such a short space of time.
Just a quick one, actually. He was born the day after my 18th birthday, which is tells about. Yeah, cheers, mate. Yeah, he's 24 and he's 25 this July. But yeah, like you said, it was interesting with the time and that he came through. And you talked about others jumping ship because, he actually made his debut in that first season we were down in League One. He didn't make it in the league, but he made it in the Football League Trophy against Morecambe at Morecambe. It's interesting because you talked about others jumping ship. 5 other players made their debut that day. There was Jordan Hunter, Jack Bainbridge, Jake Hackett, and Brandon Taylor were the other 4 who made their debuts at Morecambe. In a rotated squad. Josh Madger scored in the last minute, by the way, and we beat Morecambe. Memories of I want to say, I don't know what kind of days, shit days. I don't know. We'll use that one for now. But if you look at that, so that's a group of players thinking, right, well, Sunderland have gone down to League One, and I'm going to try and take advantage of this. I'm going to try and get experience. I'm going to try and get in the first team because at the minute the club will probably rely on young players. Remember Jack Ross turning up to training? There was like 12 players at his first training session or something like that. But, I mean, we can all look back and thankfully laugh now. I can see you putting your face behind your hands there, Andrew, thinking about it. But we can all laugh now, but the club were going in that direction and all these players were thinking, great, I've got a pathway now. But you look at those players who made their debut at that point, and with all due respect to them, where did all of them go? I don't know. I don't know where all of them are from.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
imagine most of those other 4 were local. I can't remember where each one of them were from. But Dan Neil stuck it out, and Dan Neil was good enough to come through because and he had to be patient as well. That he didn't make any appearances for the rest of that season or the season after that. So after making his debut, he thought, oh, great, we've cracked it. But like I said, the likes of Jack Ross and Phil Parkinson, and we'll go back through some names today. Going back through those times, but yeah, like you said, he stuck at it and stuck at it from a professional point of view as well as sticking with the club.
Well, that's it. And I just keep having to reiterate this point, but he achieved our dreams, Andrew. I honestly, when you think about it, a Sunderland fan captained the team at Wembley and won. He scored for Sunderland. He scored goal. He appeared for Sunderland. We'd all chop our limbs off just to get that chance, wouldn't we? You know what I mean? He genuinely lived the dream of every single Sunderland supporter, and that's why when I see that photo of him at the 2014 Cup final as a young kid standing in the stands, and it's a great picture because he's not looking at the camera, he's looking out at the pitch, and I always think of that picture because I think, that day he must have been dreaming, oh, one day I'll get to do that, and he did. And he got to go one better. He got to win. He got to lift a trophy. All right, not quite the League Cup, but still one of the best days we've had. And he was the captain that day. I mean, again, as Sunderland supporters, he did everything we could only dream of.
Exactly. We'll all have photos of us at Wembley with that look on our faces of, God, I'm watching Sunderland at Wembley. The difference is that he then went one better and fulfilled those dreams. He was a local lad, and that meant a lot to him. But I hope it doesn't come across as that's all that he had, because I think he was a really talented player. I think he did a lot of really good stuff for us. I think the stat is Chris was saying there he made his debut at Morecambe. I think at that stage he was the 6th youngest player to play for Sunderland, but
Right.
very, very rarely would you look at him and think he was immature or anything like that. He played with a very good knowledge of the game. He was usually very calm, but he had the skill as well. So he had a lot of good things going for him. And he wasn't just there because he was like a team mascot who happened to support the lads, so they thought we'll give him a game. He was there on merit. And all right, we've already named a few pretty disappointing names there. I remember Phil Parkinson, fans were pleading with him to bring Dan Neil into the team earlier and give him more regular games. So I think we all knew he had something special about him, and time after time he showed it on the pitch for us.
Yeah, and it again, just to go back over slightly, Chris, he didn't just achieve our dreams, but he played for the club at a time when, there wasn't much hope, really. He was probably, he just came into the reckoning as things were starting to improve for us. When when Lee Johnson was manager, and then Alex Neil, etc. But so many. The reason I bring that up is because so many young players have been at this football club at that age, and because the opportunities haven't been there, they just haven't got the chances. And then you reeled off a bunch of other names there of players who, to be honest, I'm mainly forgetting about. I would imagine a lot of them lads are probably playing non-league football, or some of them might not even be playing anymore. Like that is the fine line between making it and not making it. You can be just as talented as the likes of a Dan Neil at that age, but if the opportunities don't come, if you don't make the right decisions, if you do get an opportunity and you don't take it, things can quickly deteriorate, and then all of a sudden you find yourself completely out of the picture. But Dan Neil, as a professional, went on to play for Sunderland over 200 times and scored some important goals. Like the one that comes to mind immediately is that goal when we fought back from 2-0 down at Swansea to win 3-2.
The same one.
Yeah, but there are others. I mean, to be honest, I can't even remember the opponent. It might have been Norwich when he dinked it over the goalkeeper rushing onto the ball. And even some of the goals he had a hand in, that wonderful assist he made for Wilson Isidore when Isidore received the ball over his shoulder last season and spanked it into the bottom corner. Like Dan Neil was a tremendous footballer for us, but like I say, that can't be forgotten. He didn't get into the team through sheer luck. He had to really work hard to get the opportunity and then,
absolutely.
Stay in there.
I mean, just to reel off a couple of other names, by the way, and that scored for Morecambe. We had Ryan Leonard, Lee Connolly, Jacob Young. Yeah, exactly. We've got all these players at the time, and some of them might have thought, actually, well, I'm leaving Sunderland because I'm like leaving a sinking ship or something like that, or like you said, weren't getting those opportunities that they thought they might. So right, I'm going to try and get them elsewhere. But to be fair, he was always highly rated. You always heard of this. You always heard of Dan Neil, even those first couple of years in League One, and we were all thinking, right, we're going to see all these young players. I remember Jack Diamond. Everyone kind of going like clamouring for him to be in the side at certain times when we're in League One in those first couple of seasons. But Dan Neil had to be patient, like we said. He came through, and in that time, because he was an unused sub 46 times for Sunderland. I mean that's almost half a century of games where he was an unused sub. Because that goes to show in those two seasons I was talking about, 1920 and 2020-21. Where he only played 5 games, came on as sub 3 times. That was in 2 years. So that was 2 years after his debut in 18-19. So he really had to be patient. And in that time, he probably had a decision to make. Because the club, let's face it, were a shambles, especially at the youth level at that time. So it's not like now, where we see a young player and we go, yes, he's got a pathway. He's going to do this. He might go out on loan and then he might come back. And the club are almost sure this will happen to you over the next 12 months as long as you don't get injured or whatever. And it didn't have that at the time with Dan Neil, so he's just kind of bumbling along. And like you said, he kind of burst onto the scene in 21-22, played 37 games. But just looking at the opening game of that season, and Andrew's absolutely right, played left back against Wigan on the opening day of the season. So he had to basically just say, I'm going to get games anywhere and try and improve his game. And like you said, I mean, it'd be interesting when we get into it, because Andrew made the good point about saying when he started off, he was that attacking player. But I'm just wondering, Andrew, just before you head off, I wanted to ask you a question. Do you think that almost because you look at his stats and like Gav said, 201 games, 12 goals, 1 in 20. I mean, do you think we changed Dan Neil for the better almost as a player?
That's a good question. We definitely changed him. I think Corey Evans being injured meant that Dan Neil was the best option we had in that more defensive role. I remember that game under Mowbray where we beat Preston on the last day of the regular season. He was fantastic that day in a more defensive role. But that's a fair point because, sometimes people would be critical that he didn't have too many assists. He didn't score as many goals as they would have liked. But it's because he was doing that job for the team. Lads, I'm keen to hear what you say about Neil. I am gonna scoot off now. I was there at that first game against Morecambe. I remember that. I remember that day. I was there. So it's one of those where I've kind of feel as if Dan Neil's been part of my Sunderland life for a while. And yeah, he's left a little bit earlier than we thought he might do. And I'm leaving now as well, lads. So enjoy the rest of the show. And as I say, best wishes to Dan Neil. I hope he does well.
Yes, and I think that's a good place for us to leave for a little break. So when we come back, we'll chat a little bit more about Dan Neil. We'll see you in a bit.
I had that dream again. My small business needs to hire, but I don't use LinkedIn, and I hire an energy vampire. But also they're a literal vampire. And suddenly my team is spending all their time sharpening wooden stakes and buying bulk silver and rehearsing ancient chants, and then I wake up.
Don't let hiring nightmares ruin your dreams. LinkedIn Jobs' new AI assistant takes insights from over 1 billion professionals to create a short list of the best fits for you. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/quality. Start hiring today with LinkedIn.
Año nuevo, los mismos Extra Value Meals en McDonald's. Ahora te puedes llevar 2 snack wraps y papitas y una bebida mediana por solo $8. Solo por tiempo limitado. Precios y participación pueden variar. Los precios pueden ser más altos en Hawaii, Alaska y California y con entrega.
And welcome back to Howie the podcast. And just before the break, Andrew did drop off from the chat, but he was waxing lyrical about Dan Neil there, Chris, and talking about the journey that he's been on with us as fans, because we've obviously been right down to the depths to see this club in its worst ever position in the third tier. And he was, as I've said, he was probably a recipient of some of the good fortune that brought to some young players. You know, he was a player who got opportunities and stuff. But you mentioned about him before the break there, and maybe changing in his style of play as he kind of developed this role in the team. And I can remember watching him for the under-21s playing like sometimes as a 10, like really high up the pitch. And I can actually remember doing pods with you where we were debating whether he should be played further forward. I can remember talking and thinking maybe we should bring someone else in that 6th position and push Dan Neil up, because he's so creative and he can carve open opportunities and play through balls and stuff. That feels like such a long time ago, but I think what it probably does is speaks to how well-rounded he is as a midfield player, you know. Obviously, we're speaking glowingly about him right now, but there have been times where we haven't, you know. There's been times where he's had bad games and we've questioned his role in the team and things like that. But I think overall, in the main, you do have to step back and kind of look at him as a footballer and be actually quite proud that the academy produced such a talented footballer, because, you know, he's probably one of the first who emerged on the scene in the first team to have come from that generation of real ball-playing footballers. Because Sunderland players come through the academy, sometimes you always think of like, you know, grafters and people who get a boot in or whatever. But Dan Neil, a very cultured footballer.
Yeah, that's it. And it is a real strange one, because, you know, when you've got a player like this who's come through the academy and is such, was rated highly by not just Sunderland but elsewhere, you know, you think of, not quite on the same scale, but you think of your Jordan Pickfords and Jordan Hendersons who come through and they're so highly rated, they get a move. And for a long time, we were thinking, right, I think we all assumed for quite some time that if Dan Neil left, he would leave because a big club came in, or a bigger club came in and gave us an offer we couldn't refuse, and he'd go to the Premier League. And I mean, you know, in the Championship, how many times were we talking about rumours of him going to the Premier League? I remember there was one pod and I was saying that actually he'd do well at a West Ham and an Everton when we were in the Championship. And I think that was the season we finished 16th, where there was huge rumours going around, and there was rumours he was going to go off to Italy. I can't remember which teams there were out there. It was some big sides he was linked with. Yeah, he was linked with some
Roma,
really big sides. And we always assumed that he was going to leave like that, in that sort of fashion. And to have him, to have the club overtake him is, you know, we're all saying, yeah, this is a sad day. And it is, because, you know, we love to see players come through the academy. And now kind of we all kind of pin our hopes on Chris Rigg, I suppose, as a player who's come through the academy. But we all want those players to be involved. And, you know, when one leaves, you go, well, you know, could he have done this? Could he have stayed? But we've got to be happy on the other side that the club is accelerating its progress so much that a player like Dan Neil, it was almost threatening probably, let's say, I don't know, 18 months ago, maybe 2 years ago, thinking, where is he going to go on next? Because the club can't keep up with him. And we've accelerated so much, we've gone beyond that. And now Dan Neil has to find football somewhere else. But you're absolutely right with his kind of journey when he came through, like I said, that start of the season when we got promoted from League One. But he went from nothing to suddenly playing almost every game. Because like I said, after making his debut, 5 appearances in the next 2 years. And then that League One campaign when we went up in the playoffs, he started 37 games that season. So he went from nothing to right now you're part of it. And he just turned 20 at the start of that season. So it was like, right, now is your time. You're stepping up to that. And since then, I mean, after that 37 games, he then played 47 games, 44 games, 48 games. But you look at timing as well. You talk about cultured players. And we always knew he was a cracking player, but it was always a conversation with what type of player is Dan Neil. And like you said, Gav, it's really interesting to hear you saw him play for the 21s and he was almost playing as a 10. Because it's football always seems about timing. And always remember the season 23-24, so it was the season just after we got beat by Luton in the playoffs. We started the season playing Ipswich. And I remember we went 2-0 down in the game and Dan Neil scored a goal in the last few minutes. And I remember Tony Mowbray and Dan Neil saying after that, they were hoping that that season, Dan Neil was going to start pushing up and making runs into the box. And the whole kind of interviews afterwards, the conversation was all about Dan Neil playing in a more attacking role. But at the same time, we bought Joe Bellingham. And that kind of almost stunted his progress in being that attacking player, getting into the box, making those runs, because that was Joe Bellingham's role. So again, Dan Neil almost had to make the sacrifice to say, right, okay, well, if we've got those players, we've brought those in to do that job, I'm going to sit in front of the back four. And I thought he progressed in that role absolutely brilliantly. And I was really surprised in that season we finished 16th that a Premier League club didn't come in for him.
And you wouldn't bet against him still making that trajectory. Like, yeah, he's had a bump in the road because effectively Sunderland have removed, or the powers that be at Sunderland have removed sentiment from the decision making and said, what can we do to accelerate the progress of this club? Well, we can go out and sign Granit Xhaka and we can go out and sign Noah Siddiqui, and that's just unfortunate, really, for Dan Neil and maybe for other players. Like Alan Brown went out on loan. Chris Riggs not featured as heavily through the middle as he did last year. You could go on and on, really, but you wouldn't bet against him still making that sort of path. If he has a really strong second half of the season with Ipswich, they get promoted. He's then out of contract in the summer, and he's in a fantastic position to dictate his own terms of where he goes. I mean, if you believe what you read, West Ham were after him and offered him a contract, but he may not have been guaranteed the playing time. Rangers were pushing the boat out to get him up there, and Rangers are looking maybe like the favourite to win that title. Hearts, Celtic, and Rangers are all very much in a title race. So he could have went up there, could potentially played his part in a title win, and then maybe even play in the Champions League next season. But he's instead chose to go to Ipswich because he obviously likes what he heard, what they had to say, and obviously I would imagine there's been some guarantees over playing time. He knows the Championship well. He knows Jack Clark, of course, who's doing very well at the minute for Ipswich. He's their top scorer. So he had a big decision to make in where he went. But again, like I say, he's just going to be backing himself to do really well at Ipswich, and who knows what might come next. But do you think he made the right decision in going there, given the options we were aware of? Do you think Ipswich is the best of the choices that we were led to believe were on the table?
I've got to be careful because I took some messages off my mates who support Ipswich Town this morning, asking about them. But yeah, I mean, it is a real interesting one with where he's moved. And I did wonder, like you said, go back to his age. He's 24, 25 in the summer. And it's almost been a waste of a season. He's been an ever-present for the last 4 seasons. And now he's coming into what you would think would be a player's prime. And now he's lost a season, or he would have lost a season if he'd stayed put. And you've got to look at that because some people might say, well, he supports the club. Why doesn't he stay? He's training with Granit Xhaka. How much is he going to learn from that? He's training with the likes of Enzo Lefebvre. all of those type of players. Surely that would rub off on him and he's going to learn something. But at the same time, at his age, you can't lose that sort of time. You can't lose a whole season when you're apparently at your best. And the fact that he's only played 3 substitute appearances this season, you do wonder if that might have restricted him in terms of who was actually looking for him and what role he was going to play at those clubs, because you can't expect someone who hasn't played at the highest level since that playoff final. So since May, last year. So he hasn't played a full game on the pitch. He's played pre-season friendlies. And that's just not, or even, I think he played in the League Cup, but even that, you can call that a glorified friendly in some ways.
21's games, I think we might have played one or two of them.
Clubs can't go, let's pin our hopes on Dan Neil. I'm talking about the highest level. If West Ham had gotten him, West Ham would have been going, he hasn't played a first-team game for 7 months, 8 months, whatever it's been. So they couldn't have thrown him straight into the side. Rangers, I'm not going to make any jokes about the SPL. I've probably made enough in the past about that. He probably could have went straight up there, not match fit, and run the show maybe. So I'm not quite sure. But you do wonder, with the clubs looking at him, if they went, we're not going to take that risk. And the other thing, just to touch on Ipswich for a second, I think it's a fantastic deal for Ipswich. I'm really surprised he's gone back down to the Championship, but he might have done that to prove himself for the summer.
I think it's a bit of what you would call a money ball signing. They've got a player there who, a bit like we did maybe with Brian Broby or several others, a player who is probably at the minute not at the level he's capable of, but it won't take him long to get there, if that makes sense. It is like, what would Dan Neil have cost in the summer as the newly promoted captain of Sunderland before Granit Xhaka came along and all the rest of it? If Ipswich had come to Sunderland and went, right, we want your captain, what would he have cost? He would have cost a lot of money. Ipswich are getting a real top Championship player, and I think you're right to point out that this is a brilliant deal for them, because they've probably got in there at the right time. Like, there might be other points, maybe even the summer actually. Like, getting him in the summer might be quite difficult because he's out of contract. Getting him last summer would have been difficult. They've been opportunistic,
do you
really.
think that he's picked Ipswich to get, so let's say he's got 20 plus games left in the Championship. I don't know how many games they've played, but let's say he's got 20 odd games to play in the Championship between now and the end of the season. But he's now dropping down, as you said, doing something he knows inside out. He's played, what was it, 3 full seasons in the Championship. He knows that league inside out. He knows how to play it. He knows how to get promoted out of it. So he's gone to Ipswich. And do you not think then his agent might have said, look, if you play 20 odd games for Ipswich, get them promoted, and you've almost put yourself in the shop window for wherever you're going to go as a free agent in the summer?
Yeah. I think you're right. Yeah, I do. If he can really stand out in that team, let's not forget Ipswich were a Premier League team last season, so he's surrounded by players as well who were purchased when they were in the Premier League. Then it's win-win, really. Like, he can't lose, really, can he? Even if he just has a pretty average end of the season, he's going to have played, they've played 28 games, so he's going to have played, another 18 games between now and the end of the season, and then maybe more if they get to the playoffs. And again, you just mentioned it there, he's got playoff experience and he's won it. So for him, it's a really good opportunity just to get his name back out there, yeah? And we know, well, given what happened with Ipswich last season when they got promoted and they just built this Championship super team. But for individual players, that's quite important, actually, because Daniel probably knows, if I get promoted with Ipswich and I come to the summer and I think, I want to hang around, I'll probably get games in the Premier League next season. So there's that as well, isn't there? He's really fortunate because there aren't many players who, did you say he was 24, Daniel? So he's coming up 25. There can't be many 24-year-olds who've captained the team that they grew up supporting, yes, but played 200-odd games, being the captain of a promotion-winning team. He's still got his best years ahead of him, and that he's in such a unique position. Like, to be honest, I guess this is maybe one for down the road. We might find out more about it, but how he ended up being in a position where he's out of contract in the summer. There can't be many lads his age who run out of contract at 24-year-old, given they've been so important to the team they play for. Like, generally, the teams would be doing whatever they could to either sell them or give them a bumper deal to keep them tied down for longer, because he's about to enter his prime, really. So he is in such a fortunate position as an
on that
individual.
contract. It's because that was a real weird one, wasn't it? Because at the time when the negotiations first started, he was probably, in the driving seat in terms of what he was asking for. And it's interesting as well. You listen to Jamie Carragher and Gary Neville, and one of the things they always say is if you come through at the same club, you never get the same money or the same contract as you would if you sign for someone else and go to another club.
They would say that, wouldn't they?
Well, that's what they reckon anyway. But if that's true, then then the club might not have offered Dan Neil maybe as much as they might have a new signing, because you've got to entice somebody to sign. But he had all the chips, didn't he, when it came to negotiating that first contract? I was going to say, because it did feel weird that he didn't just put pen to paper, and he was almost kind of at the time, let's wait and see what happens. Let's wait and see if Sunderland get promoted. Because do you reckon he was almost waiting to think, well, actually, if Sunderland don't get promoted, I'm off?
Yeah, probably, because there would have been a bunch of them that did that, I think. And it was a fine line. We weren't guaranteed to go up. I mean, we kind of defied the odds and did the unthinkable when you consider how we'd done it. Really, the way we won those games was just magical, but it could have gone the other way. If that second goal for Sheffield United stands in the final, we're talking about something in the Championship right now, and it's scary, really. But he probably would have, yeah. He probably would have went, actually, I've done just about everything at Sunderland that I can. It's probably a good time to go. And actually, from the club's perspective, they would have went, yeah, he's got a year left on his deal. We need the money, because we wouldn't have the Premier League money that came in subsequently. We need the money. We can probably get 10 million quid for him. Let's reinvest it in the team, as we did with Jack Clark, as we did with Ross Stewart, So, yeah, I think there's a bit of that. By the way, and I think this is important, I do not begrudge him that decision. And I think, you talk about loyalty, but in sure, yeah, he's a Sunderland fan and all the rest of it. But you could argue the club haven't been particularly loyal to him, really. We've stepped past him very quickly. Yeah, he's been looked after. He's been a part of the squad. He's been valued, I'm sure. But he hasn't had the playing opportunities. The club didn't go, right, well, Dan Neil got us to the Premier League, so we're going to give him a chance in the Premier League. The club just went out and signed a world-class replacement, stripped him of the captaincy, and said, it is what it is, and there's probably more to that. And I really do want to hear at some point what actually went on with the contract negotiations for him, and what the truth is, and why the club didn't give him one that he wanted, and why he didn't sign a deal that the club offered. I'm sure that'll all come out in the wash eventually. But clearly, they couldn't agree on something, because other players who were at the club last season have had more chances than he's had, and that's been quite telling. That cup game against Everton where he didn't get on the pitch. Only really being used when we were desperate, like during AFCON when we had nobody else on the bench. I think he came on for a handful of minutes in certain games and things. Otherwise, he's been absolutely nowhere near. So, I don't begrudge him what he's done. I certainly don't blame him for being a little bit selfish and choosing his own path out of this. The club are in a good place. We've got plenty of money stacked away. The Premier League money will have done us a massive favour this year. So, it's not a case of the club going, Dan, we could do with the money, we need you to go somewhere where we're going to sell you. He's actually just been a little bit selfish and just went, I'm going to choose what I do from here. And he's earned that right, because, as I said, he stuck by the club when we were in a shit state in League One, when other lads his age disappeared. He could have gone then. He didn't. He stuck about. He became the captain. He got promoted twice with us. He's earned that, I think. I think he's earned that chance.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, he joined the club when he was 8 years old. So it's not like, I mean, I think that the club have done well out of him and he's done well out of the club, to be fair. I mean, they use each other at that point. But it is a real strange one. And I do find it surprising, when you say that we're now into late January and he's only made 3 substitute appearances. And I think one of those was almost the last kick of the game, just to waste a little bit of time, if my memory's right. But it's so strange that you've got a captain of the club who played so well as well last season. It wasn't just captain of the club and age and, getting on a bit or anything like that on his way out. I mean, in his prime, midfielder played, 48 games in total, 44 in the championship as we're getting promoted. And then suddenly, look, don't get us wrong, you signed Granit Xhaka, so Dan Neil steps aside. But I'm still surprised, and it'd be really interesting. I assume we'll never hear it, but it'd be really interesting to hear what Regis Lebris, thought about not giving him almost any game time, because there has been times when we have been surprised, especially the early part of the season. Let's say the first 10 games, at least, when we got used to Dan Neil not coming on. But there was times in those games where you thought, this is not a bad scenario to put Dan Neil on and put a foot on the ball. And he just didn't. So it'd be interesting to know why Regis Lebris didn't think Dan Neil was up to it in terms of playing in the Premier League. Was it he's not physical enough? Was it he's not quick enough? Was it that yard of pace? Was it because there's things you could point to the Dan Neil where you could say, right, well, until he plays in the Premier League week in, week out, they are question marks. And I imagine that's what the manager would have had on him. But, and it is weird because I got, and I'm going to put this on to you actually, because I got a question from a Ipswich fan this morning saying, we've signed Dan Neil. What type of player is he? And I just said straight away, I said, you'll quite often never notice him, but you'll realise he keeps ticking things over. He's just there. He's always seems to be in the right position. Only very rarely does he do the spectacular, but he's just tidy. He's just neat. He'll keep things ticking over. He'll keep possession of the ball. But, and again, another one for you. I don't know what you think Regis Lebris thought, but it's clearly with 3 substitute appearances, he just didn't think he was up to it in the Premier League.
Yeah, unless there's some other nefarious reason he's not allowed to play games, which we've never heard any hint of. I mean, you've got to say that during his time in the first team, quite a lot of information about Dan Neil seems to get out there because obviously he's local. So, his family and friends all talk to people and you hear tidbits of this and that. But there's been nothing, has there, really? There's been the odd little thing here and there I've heard about the contract that the club offered him and things like that. But generally nothing. Nah, there's been no sort of hint of, if he plays 5 games, the club have got to give him an extra 10 grand a week or he'll get an extra year automatically. There's been none of that. So I can only assume it's for footballing reasons because, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But the thing that doesn't make the most sense to me anyways is that he was such a trusted member of that team last season. He played, as you just said, virtually every game. How does the trust dissipate so quickly? That's what I would really like to know. And maybe in the fullness of time, we'll find out. But even if it was him and Lebris don't get on, they don't see eye to eye, I think you would have heard something about it. So it is weird. It's actually made me feel a little bit strange about all of this. I'm not feeling like a release of emotion or anything. I kind of came to terms with Dan Neil leaving a long time ago. This just feels like the confirmation that he's gone. Because I've spoken to other people, earlier in the day who said that they're really gutted about this news. But I find it hard to be gutted because I saw this coming a mile off ages ago. Do you know what I mean? I should be gutted. I was devastated when Bailey Wright left, and I love Bailey Wright. But he even spent time on loan away. He went off to Rotherham and that. And then when he left, the club done this really emotional interview with him, and I was properly gutted about it. Where with this, I just feel it's been coming, hasn't it? On the style of play thing that you mentioned there, what your mate's kind of asking what kind of player he is. You're right in that you kind of don't recognise him on the pitch very often, but he is very good, isn't he, at just shielding the back four. And he came along at a time, you've got to remember when he came into the team in, 2020, 21, whenever it was. That was just after we'd went through this era in League One of just cloggers, crabs who could only pass it backwards to the goalkeeper and out of the fullbacks. We did, though. We had so many of them in that 6th position. I'm not going to name them because it's disrespectful, I guess. But, they were of that level. They were League One midfield players where I thought when Dan Neil came through, he's not a League One footballer. He's going to be really good because he had that technique and that quality of picking the ball up and turning. And look, when he was sort of earning his stripes in the team, there were occasions where he would turn and he would get dispossessed easily, and we even conceded goals from mistakes he made. I remember talking about it on the pods, and us coming off after the pods, like hitting like stop on the record button and going, I just don't know about Dan Neil. Like, we had them conversations when he was coming up, didn't we? But he developed, he got better and better. But I'd be lying if I said that I was always a massive fan of him. There were times when I was questioning my own judgment of him as a player. But yeah, when he first arrived on the scene, he was an improvement on what.
Can you remember the start of the championship season when we first went up? And we went to Bramall Lane, and we went to play Sheffield United there. And he'd come off the back of a couple of games making mistakes, and he lost possession exactly like you've described, and he took him out and got sent off. And it was a brilliant performance still. We still got beat, but we were fantastic after the sending off. And I remember me and you were talking afterwards, and we were saying it was brilliant because at that point, there was almost quite a lot of pressure from the fans to pull Dan Neil out, saying he needs games out of the team. And the club would just go, no, we know he's brilliant. He just needs games. Keep him in the team, keep him playing, keep him doing what he's doing, and he'll come good. And that's what happened. But I think a big part of that was that role he was asked to play. I don't think Dan Neil really ever properly enjoyed playing in that deeper role. I always think he wanted to get forward, and he wanted to play in a more forward role. And the club just went, because of the signings we made and because he was really good at it, we said, no, you're going to play in that holding midfield role. And I think as a club, we've almost pigeonholed him. So I think everybody across the country, when they think of Dan Neil, and, like I said, that the lad was, when I replied and said, this is the type of player he is, he went, oh yeah, that's what I thought. And we've almost pigeonholed him because of the way we've played him. And it'll be really interesting if he goes to Ipswich, and Ipswich, because can't remember the guy's name there, the manager, that's it.
Kieran McKenna.
He's a clever fella, so you wonder if he'll turn around and go, well, I'm just going to play you where you know how to play, and or whether he's going to talk to him and say, actually, I know that you're a more advanced player. Can we play you in a more advanced role further up the pitch and things? So I'll be on to my mates to see, where he plays for Ipswich. And but like I said, we wondered where he would go. It's been rumbling on, and you said, you're not that, kind of devastated. It's because this has been rumbling on for 12, 18 months at the very least now, where at first we thought he was going to jump ship if we didn't get promoted. Then we did get promoted, and then he didn't get in. Then we thought, right, well, he's not getting a game, so he's going to leave. So it's been rumbling on for that long now. It's been inevitable, and we've just been waiting for when and where he's going to go. So I think all Sunderland fans, look, club captain, over 200 appearances, 2 promotions under his belt, a 24-year-old. Everyone just says, I think he leaves with a big thank you and a big pat on the back, and every Sunderland fan will wish him well for the future. And I think we'll all be looking out for him as long as he doesn't come back to play against us.
Yeah. Well, I think as well, and it would be remiss of us not to mention this before we finish up, but just look at the pure outpouring of messages and support from people around him. The club have made a big deal of it, obviously. Christian Speakman had some really nice words to say about him. I think virtually every player at the club has posted something about him on social media. There were other comments on the club website, which people can dig all this out. It's on sfc.com. But Patrick Roberts, Chris Rigg, Joe Bellingham, Lyndon Gooch, Michael Proctor, who, of course, is our assistant coach, Robin Nichols, the academy manager, Enzo Lafayette, Trey Hume, Corey Evans, like all of these people who've worked with Dan Neil at Sunderland just can't speak highly enough of him. And I think I would be pointing your Ipswich mates in the direction of that. Like, look at the impact this kid, 24-year-old, he leaves us, and look at the impact he's had at this football club. There's not many people, certainly in the last 10, 15 years, Chris, we've had some right arseholes at Sunderland, and there's not many people have had that reaction, if any, really. I mean, maybe Lyndon Gooch to a degree, like Bailey Wright, maybe, but like Dan Neil, I think, is out there on his own. There's only really him and Luke O'Nien, because they've been on that journey with us, who would get that level of sort of support and love from their teammates. And I think the one thing I would really like to point people to is the interview with Luke O'Nien on SFC.com. there's a class line in there where he says something about the playoff final and just kind of how it all defined him as a person. He said, in the last 10 seconds of the game at Wembley, he turned to me and said, "Luke, I want you to lift the trophy with me." In the biggest moment of his life, he put someone else first. That tells you everything about him. If anyone ever questions his leadership, look at his journey. A Sunderland fan from birth, 200 games, captain, Wembley promotion. You can't write it. That says it all, doesn't it? Just really, really nice words. So there's not really much else we can say about Dan Neil other than thanks, I guess, Did brilliantly for us. We're going to watch on from afar and support him and cheer him on as long as it's not against us. And I've got a sneaking suspicion it won't be too long before we see him again, because I'm pretty sure it'll be in the next year or so when we're lined up against somebody.
Well, even if he signs for Ipswich and Ipswich get promoted, that might be the game next season. But look, I do think he's a Premier League player. I think he'll be gutted he didn't get the chance to start a game in the Premier League for Sunderland. I think that was probably one thing he wanted to tick the box on. So it's a shame he didn't get to do that. But at the same time, look, we've gone through it, how much he's done at Sunderland, and the fact that he went from going to Wembley to watch the lads to doing what he did at Wembley and help us to the Premier League as club captain and lifting that trophy. So look, he's had those moments with the club, and if he comes back, he'll get a fantastic reception. Because let's bank on him not coming back in black and white. That's something that will no doubt never happen. So we'll give him a good reception if he ever comes back. And but I'm sure he will. Like I said, I think he's a Premier League player. And it's just, like I said, the fact that the club are progressing so quickly that he's missed out on that. But we wish him all the best.
Indeed. And I think we'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Yeah, and thank you to Andrew, who has obviously dropped off quite a while ago now, but he did jump in to give his thoughts. Thanks to listeners. We will be back with another pod tomorrow. I'm not quite sure what we're going to do yet, but I think we've got something lined up. Obviously, this week, a little bit different because we're playing Burnley on Monday rather than at the weekend. So we might have a couple of specials in between now and then, maybe react to some news. Hey, the other thing we haven't talked about today is if a midfielder's going out the door, is one going to come in? You never know. So there might be some movement on that front in the next couple of days. We don't know. But we are nearing the end of the transfer window. If there's any big news like this one with Dan Neil, we will be, of course, reacting to it here on the pod. So stick with us. I mentioned the Burnley game. We're going to be building up to that too over the weekend, and there will be the usual reaction after the match. So get subscribed to How We the Podcast if you aren't already. We are free. We are daily. You don't have to pay anything. You just hit subscribe, and we will be on your device every single morning. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Chris, Andrew, and thank you to Dan Neil. We'll see you later.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now, you call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time, 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.